a woman has
Greetings, minions and associates. If you are already a minion you would like to tithe, please hit like. If you'd like to become a minion, please hit subscribe or follow. If you would like to confess, please do so in the comments. And if you would like to evangelize, please share. I would really appreciate that share thing. And the like thing is really good too. Particularly on YouTube. I think I'm gonna just start begging on YouTube today. I'm just gonna beg for follows because I'm really just not getting followers. Now I'm not doing regular videos right now either, so maybe if I do regular videos I'll get some actual follows. Anyway, so this guy is a real work of art. Let me show you this guy. Dr. Chris Palmer. He is dangerous. He is as dangerous as you could possibly get. He's every bit as dangerous as Simon Baron Cohen. Just thankfully, this guy isn't as well known. It really surprises me to hear this guy, how he talks. Just look at the way they frame this. Now, this isn't him. Let's put this out. This was edited by somebody else. The Diary of a CEO, whoever this guy is. But just listen to the way it's framed and listen to the way this guy talks.
If a woman has obesity and diabetes, she has quadruple the risk.
I really like the dramatic drum music. Boom, boom.
Of having an autistic child. But I want to go deeper.
Not exactly. Yes, there is an increased case, but I don't know that it stacks the way he is a scaremonger, is what he is. So you really have to take everything he says with a little salt shaker full of salt. Okay?
And most people don't know this. Something horrible has happened.
Dr. Chris Palmer,
the Harvard psychiatrist
whose groundbreaking new research could be the missing piece to cure the mental health epidemic.
Mental disorders are the leading cause of disease and disability worldwide. Governments are actually labeling them.
And he's got a book he can sell you to tell you how to save everything, although he doesn't have a technique or anything that's proven, because if it was, then everybody would be using it. That's the thing. You know, when these quacks, when these snake oil people come out, oh, this the newest, best, great thing, and it's a secret, and the mainstream medical people don't want you to know because of big pharmacy and big whatever. You know what? When stuff works, the big pharmacy is the first one that wants it. In fact, they will go out of their way to try to sue your ass because they have the attorneys to do it too, even if it's not theirs, just to try to get it from you. I mean, it's shady, horrible stuff. My point is if something works, everybody's going to know about it, and you can't just hide that crap. Like you'll have somebody, some big doctor in India or something picking it up and using it if it works, and then that's going to get famous in India. So it doesn't matter where it comes from. If it works and it's real, it's going to get publicity. It's not, people aren't trying to freaking hide the cure to autism. In fact, autistic people don't even want a cure to autism. It's just bizarre how all this stuff gets framed to me.
them as terminal illnesses and to allow
Oh my goodness, they throw terminal illness. Autism is not terminal, and it's not an illness. Oh my goodness. But they're trying to frame it that way, labeling them as
people to die by assisted suicide. And they're going to allow them to die because they know what I'm saying is true. They know that our treatments fail people year after year after year. And what
yeah, your treatments do, and that's why nobody's heard of you before. That's why I look for this stuff every single day, and it took me months to find you, dude. Months of studying to find you. You're that much of a snake oil quack that nobody's listening to you, thankfully. Just a handful of very desperate people that don't have the common sense or the experience to know snake oil when they see it. This is a type of cult right here. This type of person, they get to be a cult, they get a cult following. They definitely do. They write a book, and then they have these little conferences and all this stuff like that, and they begin to get a cult following. Absolutely, and you can tell this is definitely one of them. Just by the way he talks. This dude is scary.
What I'm here to say is you can, in fact, get better.
How?
I struggled with mental illness myself for 20 years.
Really?
I tried to kill myself several
editing is
times.
horrible.
There was no hope for me whatsoever.
I mean, actually, it's very good editing, but the whole principle behind it of being so dramatic and everything else. We're talking about autism here. Come on, let's lighten up.
And I was furious with the mental health field for being
I was
so
furious.
incompetent. And I wanted to try to help. And the thing that people have not opened their eyes to is the science of metabolic health. And there's
Oh my goodness! So he's going to be throwing out these big words like metabolic health and stuff like that, and saying that he's got the answers and all this. I just want you to see how he frames this. Okay, if metabolic health was a thing that changed autism, everybody would know about it. What he's saying here would be proven, but he doesn't have the proof. He doesn't have any proof whatsoever, and you'll see that too. He talks a big talk, but there's no walk whatsoever. I just saw a little teeny tiny thing, but it was like 6 minutes long or something. Maybe 10 minutes, I think, that I watched through, and I was like, oh my god, this guy is just so totally cult. Absolute 1000% cult.
tiny things in our cells that can heal and recover people who have had
And
chronic
this guy's perpetuating it.
illnesses.
Whoever's channel this is.
And if autism is genetic, it shouldn't quadruple in 20 years. These are facts, and we can do something about it today. The easiest way to understand
you
it
should
is
not be perpetuating this crap on your channel, man. Wow, you are just in for drama. You know, I bet he has 500,000 followers at least. Okay, he's got 6.5 million followers. Yeah, that's okay. So all he cares about is the drama. Yeah. Okay. So he's got all kinds of people that he's interviewed here and stuff. Yeah, he's about the drama. Okay, he does not give a crap about autism or anything else. But it's still very good to watch.
if a woman has obesity and diabetes, she has
Whenever I read a book, I like to know everything I can about the author, because if you know what the author wants you to walk away with, that's what is important. That author, whatever the writing is, wants you to learn something, wants to influence you in one way or another. Maybe it's good influence. Maybe they're teaching you something of value. But the purpose is, with every contact we have, with every animal, with every creature we have, it's about influencing one another. In one way or another, we influence each other. It's all about, that's what interactions are. And that's just something that we need to recognize. And when this guy is to the point of cult influence. This guy is a quack. He's got a book, and it's snake oil, and he wants to change your life with diet. Now, the thing is, he's going to take bits and pieces that are true, and there is a lot to be said for diet with autism. Okay, we know this. But when you get to the extent that this guy is, you see how he's going to disqualify the entire medical field and say, I've got the answer. I am the way. And he's not going to have any actual evidence or proof. There's not going to be, here's the peer-reviewed paper. Boom. That's all you have to do. But no, that's not going to happen here because he's a quack. He's not real.
That
Quick one. This is really, really fascinating to me. On the back end of our YouTube channel, it says that 69.9% of you that watch this channel frequently over the lifetime of this channel haven't yet hit the subscribe button. I just wanted to ask you a favor. It helps this channel so much if you choose to just subscribe. Helps us scale the guests, helps us scale the production, and it makes this show bigger. So if I could ask you for one favor, if you've watched this show before and you've enjoyed it and you like this episode that you're currently watching, could you please hit the subscribe button? Thank you so much, and I will repay that gesture by making sure that everything we do here gets better and better and better and better. That is a promise I'm willing to make you. Do we have a deal? Chris, when you speak, before we started recording, you speak with a deep, authentic sense of mission. And that underneath there is a personal driver that is unimitatable, and that is getting you out of bed every day. Because I could see it in your eyes.
He must be an autism dad or something. I bet you that's what he is.
I could see it in the way that you said the words that you said to me. Where does that drive begin for you? What was the catalyst moment in your life that inspired you and gave you that fire that seems to be unquenchable to pursue the path that you've pursued?
You know, I struggled with mental illness myself, starting in childhood. Nobody recognized it. Nobody diagnosed it. I didn't know what it was. Nobody knew what it was. I just knew I was different and somehow ostracized for who I was. And it just felt like part of who I am. And then a series of horrible, tragic events happened in my extended family when I was about 12 years old. And my mother ended up having a nervous breakdown. She called it a nervous breakdown.
Okay, wow, he's going to really go into it. What's going on here?
Started with what we would call major depression, quickly escalated to depression with suicidality, and then she developed psychotic symptoms. She became very delusional. She got mental health treatment, but the treatment didn't work. They basically were just kind of, in my 12-year-old mind, the psychiatrists were just drugging her. And those drugs weren't making her symptoms better. They weren't restoring her health. She went on to live the rest of her life with a chronic psychotic disorder. And that disorder completely ruined and devastated her life in so many ways. She lost everything. She lost custody of her 8 kids. She lost all of her money, everything. The courts didn't give her any support or any money. I had my own struggles, even worse, with mental illness after all of that. I ended up leaving home before I finished high school. I had chronic depression and suicidality and OCD and other things. And the mental health
all that stuff's very, very common for autistic people.
Field was worthless for me and probably caused a lot of harm for me. And so at the end of the day, the reason I'm a psychiatrist is because I recognize how horrible and devastating mental illness can be. And I came to the field really angry with the mental health field for being so incompetent. And I wanted to try to help. I wanted to try to maybe contribute to better solutions for people.
My futile attempts to save you from the ravages of mental illness lit a fire in me that burns to this day. I'm sorry I didn't figure this out in time to help you. May you rest in peace.
That's my mom. And that's the dedication of the book. Her story and the devastation to her life is the thing that drives me to this day. And I just know that there are hundreds of millions of people just like her, with different diagnoses, with different symptoms, but the devastation to their lives
This is
is
so
the same.
weird.
And those people deserve better. And I want to help them. I want to get them better treatment.
Those people exist on some kind of, I guess, multiple different spectrums of disorder.
Weird.
What are those spectrums of disorders? And what are those disorders that you're referring to when you say those people are the people that I want to help?
People who are diagnosed with a mental illness. And so,
Which
there's
is no one on the spectrum.
the diagnoses are all over the map. We have all of these different diagnoses in the DSM-5-TR, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual.
Now he's conflating terms. He's conflating illness with diagnostic. You can't conflate those two different things, and you should know better than that.
Of psychiatry, which is kind of considered the Bible of psychiatry.
And he's doing it on purpose
And it has all
to
of
twist everything.
these labels in it. Schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, major depressive disorder, alcohol use disorder, which most people know as alcoholism, other addictions, anorexia nervosa, but also autism spectrum disorder, or dementia that most people know as Alzheimer's disease. That those are all of the labels in our kind of Bible of psychiatry. And the reality is that when you look at the treatment outcomes for people who are getting treatment for those diagnostic labels, there is no doubt that our treatments do work for a lot of people, millions of people.
What?
And so millions of people are helped. Their lives can be saved.
Oh, okay. Okay, if he's not talking about autism, he's talking about all this other stuff. So now he's conflating everything. This was supposed to be about autism, but that's complete BS if he's trying to say that about autism.
By the current treatments that we have. And I'm not here to take that away from anyone. So for people who are getting treatment and those treatments are working, keep getting that treatment. I don't want to interfere with anyone's access to those medications or psychotherapies or electroconvulsive therapy or whatever treatment they're getting. I don't want to stand in the way. But there are far too many people just like my mother,
Dude,
who did everything they were asked to do, who took all of the pills, who showed up for their therapy appointments, who
he
did
thinks electroconvulsive therapy is okay.
everything they were asked to do, and they're not getting better. Mental disorders as a whole are now the leading cause of disease burden and disability worldwide. And it's not because those people aren't getting treatment. Many of them are getting treatment. Yes, there are people who can't afford treatment or can't get access to care, but a lot of people are getting treatment. I work at one of the best psychiatric hospitals in the world. I have the privilege of doing
This guy's
that.
so annoying.
And we see patients that aren't getting better. We see them all the time, day in and day out.
Okay, so what you're doing is not working.
And the crisis, the tragedy is that
else.
some governments are actually
Or
now
don't try something
moving
else.
to labeling mental illnesses as terminal illnesses. The Canadian government in March of 2024 is going to allow people to die by assisted suicide because of a treatment-resistant mental illness.
Really?
Yes. They're going to allow them to die. And they're going to allow them to die.
As it is in Canada right now, let's see how old this is. This is 4 months ago. As it's easier, I understand, to actually get euthanasia than it is to get a doctor, because you can just go, once you have a doctor, you can just go to them and they can just sign off on it. Whereas it could take like 3 years to actually get a doctor in Canada. So, in some respects, it's easier to unlife yourself medically than it is to actually even get a doctor in Canada. Just a bizarre thing.
Die because they know what I'm saying is true. They know that our treatments fail people year after year after year. And those people become desperate and hopeless. And they give up on treatment for good reason, because they've participated in treatment for decades and it hasn't helped them.
Like ABA, maybe? He's not going to say, he won't call stuff out. So you don't know what he's actually talking about. He's not going to say what he's actually talking about. I don't know if he's talking about ABA. I don't know if he's talking about speech therapy. I don't know if he's talking about physical therapy. I have no clue.
And the Canadian government has now made the decision that they should be allowed to die with the help of a physician who can prescribe deadly medications and make it easy for them to die by suicide. The UK is now labeling some people with eating disorders as terminal eating disorders. And that maybe, if they've exhausted treatment, if they've had treatment for several years or more than a decade, well, treatment's just not going to work for them. So let's call them terminally ill with an eating disorder. People are frustrated and hopeless. Again, I'm not talking about the people for whom
Okay, so he's got that's all legit.
treatment's working. If treatment is working for someone, if they're taking a pill and it's working, fantastic.
No. You cannot just sit there and say something like that. What if they're taking cyanide and think it's helping them? Dude, you cannot make a statement like that. That's irresponsible, man. That's so irresponsible. Just because you think something is working does not mean you continue doing it when it could be harming you. I don't care what this guy says.
Lucky. Keep doing it. And I don't want to interfere with anyone's access to that treatment.
No, if something is working, then fine. Yeah, I agree, but you can't just throw down just because you think something's working. That doesn't necessarily mean it's doing anything at all. You have to know that it's working, and not just because you think it is because of your circumstances. I'm talking the science has got to be there.
But we can't hide from the tragic realities of the world.
For all of those people that they might have extreme anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, OCD, these extreme sort of mental health disorders, what is it that you want to put into their hearts and minds with your work, with the message that you're spreading? What is it that those people need to know? And I say that not as all of the details, which we're going to go into, but the very top line message that, maybe in a sentence you want those people to have.
If you have been trying treatment and those treatments aren't working for you, please don't give up. There is hope. You can, in fact, get better. If you understand the science, you can get better.
Okay,
The mental health conversation,
He's starting to go down. Okay, well, if you understand if you'll get better. That's what he said. If you understand, you'll get better.
Prevalence of mental health.
You can throw this down with anyone. If you understand God, you'll get better. If you understand cancer, you'll get better. Whatever.
Lots of these things seem to have changed in the last 28 years. What is the state of mental health as we sit here today? And how has that changed in the 28 years that you've been at Harvard and working in this field?
I think I have a slightly different perspective. Yours sounded more hopeful than mine. You kind of said things have changed in 28 years. And tragically, I actually feel like they haven't changed a whole lot. If you look globally at the problem of mental illness is increasing. It is not stagnant and is not decreasing. It is increasing in prevalence throughout the world. Prior to the pandemic, about 1 billion people had a mental or substance use disorder, representing about 13% of the world's population. And that was just in one given year, 2017.
I think he's going to try to conflate mental illness here again with autism. And I think he's going to try to conflate them. Because he's putting them in the same category right now. He's talking about mental illness. Well, autism is not a mental illness. It doesn't have anything to do with being mentally ill. That is a completely different thing. Now, we could be both autistic and mentally ill, but autism itself is not mental illness. It's a neurological disorder. There's a difference.
The pandemic added insult to injury, and rates are much higher now. And the rates of mental illness have been increasing across a wide range of diagnostic categories. Rates of autism in the United States over the last 20 years have quadrupled.
Now he's going to leave it there to make it sound like, oh my God, there's 4 times as many autistic people running around as there was before. And that's bullshit. What we know is that what has quadrupled is diagnostics. These are kids that are adults that weren't diagnosed before. But he is not going to tell you that. He's not going to clarify that. He's going to be a scaremonger. Watch.
A 4-fold increase. Rates of ADHD are up and through the roof. Rates of bipolar disorder in adults. A lot of people think bipolar disorder, that's genetic. Well, in adults in the United States over the last 20 years, rates have doubled. In children and adolescents.
So maybe people are getting diagnosed more? Mental health is getting better at catching these things?
Rates are through the roof, up exponentially, 1,000-fold percent. Rates of plain old bread and butter depression.
Rates of plain old bread and butter depression.
Major depressive disorder. The Gallup poll does an annual survey in the United States of current and lifetime prevalence of depression. And just this year in 2023, rates of both current prevalence and lifetime prevalence reached all-time ever recorded highs. So we have a catastrophe. We have an epidemic. Mental illness is a growing, escalating problem. And I wish that I could say our treatments were dramatically better. There is no doubt we do have new treatment options. We have ketamine and psychedelics. We've got transcranial magnetic stimulation, which wasn't around when I first started.
Talking about shocks therapy and stuff like that. Now.
We have work for everyone, and they even fail to work for most people. In the largest study ever done of depression, when people come in, the very first antidepressant treatment they get, over 4,000 people treated at the best academic centers that we have in the United States. The first antidepressant treatment, only about 30% get a remission. That means 70% still have major depressive disorder. They have enough symptoms to still be labeled clinically depressed to make their symptoms enough of their symptoms go away. Now, even those 30% who got a remission, many of them are still having low-grade symptoms, like all of their...
Like, are every one of these people autistic? What was the age group? What was their sex? What was their gender? What country were they from? I mean, come on.
Symptoms didn't go away. And after 4 levels of treatment, the original published report said that 67% got a remission.
And how many people were there? 3?
After 4 different types of treatment for major depressive disorder. If we take that at face value, that means 1/3 of patients are still clinically depressed after 4 levels of treatment. Other researchers have challenged that 67% figure because the reality is half of the people in that study dropped out because it just wasn't working out for them. So we got a problem there. Like this protocol clearly isn't working out well for people when half of the people are dropping out of your study. And the second problem is that there are some researchers who point out that they changed the criteria for remission during the study. They prospectively said they were going to define remission in a very certain way using certain metrics. Those researchers said if they stuck to their protocol, only about 35% got a remission after 4 treatment levels. And that would mean 2/3 of people, after getting 4 levels of treatment, are still clinically depressed.
Oh my word.
That is the current state of affairs for depression, something that we all know. It's something that we've got so many treatments for. If we look at more quote-unquote serious mental disorders like bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, the results are abysmal. One large study of 6,000 patients with schizophrenia, only 4% of the patients got a recovery, meaning that their symptoms were in full and complete remission. They had a decent quality of life, and that they were able to function in the world. They were able to have a job or go to school. Only 4% of people with schizophrenia got that using our best treatments available today. Those statistics aren't a lot better than they were 50 years ago, tragically.
Chris, when people say to you, or when people say...
In other words, and the very best you can do isn't doing anything at all. Wow. Dude.
And that's why
it hasn't changed anything. You just said the very best that you're doing. That 4% hasn't changed.
And that's why it's taking as long as it is.
Wow.
The Russian strategy is clear. They're putting pressure on the Ukrainian lines.
Quite common rebuttal that the reason we're seeing this rise in mental health disorders is just because there's more of a conversation about it, so more people are stepping forward. We now have a word for it, so there's just more labelling, and these mental health disorders, like the ones you've named, and even things like ADHD and autism, it's just because there's more conversation going on. And these things aren't, in fact, increasing.
That is a common argument. And I would argue that it's like just putting your head in the sand. The easiest place to get an accurate read on the true prevalence of mental illness, and not just the recognition of it, but the true prevalence of it, is to talk to school teachers who've been teaching for more than 30 years. If you ask them, were you just not recognizing the children 30 years ago who are screaming and tantruming in your classroom? Were you just not...
Okay, we're not going to do any studies or anything. We're going to go talk to teachers. This is about autism. We're not going to do any peer-reviewed studies with controls or anything else. We're just going to go talk to teachers. We're not going to talk to autistic people.
Medvedev said that
recognizing the children
Russia would respond
who
by
were melting
American
down when they got
in,
bad grades and injuring themselves in class. Were you just not recognizing the level of despair that you and anxiety that you see in children? Did you just have your head in the sand back then? And now, since everybody's talking about it, you see those behaviors.
This is irresponsible because there actually are a lot of teachers that did have their head in the sand. Literally. And if they had said anything to parents, then they probably would have gotten all kinds of reprimands.
See those symptoms. The school teachers and the guidance counselors will laugh at you and say, no, no, no. Something has happened. Something horrible has happened.
Oh, bullshit.
I wasn't ignoring mental health 30 years ago.
He's trying to say that the teacher's going to say that there's more autism now than there used to be. What a bunch of bullshit. This is so freaking totally irresponsible. This has nothing to do with science, and you know that, buddy.
Years ago, I wasn't ignoring despair 30 years ago. I wasn't ignoring extreme.
It doesn't matter if they think they did. Because they may think they did. It may have something to do with something else that doesn't have anything to do with autism. Or the frequency of anything. Their perspectives may be skewed.
Extreme anxiety and panic. I wasn't ignoring tantrums in my classroom 30 years ago. They are skyrocketing in prevalence. If we look at emergency rooms, so emergency rooms in the United States, that's, I can speak best about statistics here in the United States.
This is so awful. Look at emergency
But I
rooms.
think in most Western countries, these statistics are similar. We have a crisis in mental health in emergency rooms. In particular, youth mental health, but it's across the board. We have all of these children.
He's completely conflating mental health issues with autism, which is something completely different. Now, autistic people can.
Things like Ukrainian Nazis and the Azov battalions and all that nonsense. People credibly believe that.
Okay.
It's a very, very powerful thing. And it's absolutely something that Russia are going to keep trying to do.
And adolescents showing up to emergency rooms having attempted suicide, or they're becoming psychotic, and they're diagnosed with bipolar disorder at skyrocketing rates. And we don't have enough services to treat these people. These kids, these adolescents, our children, we don't have places to put them. So they sit in emergency rooms, not getting optimal care, simply getting medicated, sometimes restrained to a hospital gurney so that they don't try to run away or hurt themselves.
Okay, he's really doing this great job of this fear-mongering with autism. See how fear-mongering he is here? This is really bad.
Talk to anybody in an emergency room. We're seeing that. Those people weren't hiding in their homes 30 years ago. Something's happening. They
Actually, yes, we were 50 years ago, buddy.
are actively acting on mental health symptoms. They are acting out of despair. The suicide rate has gone up. If you in the
Suicide rate gone up? What? Who? What? He just throws out this random shit, and it can be true. The suicide rate's gone up. Well, guess what? The suicide rate's gone down, and I can find you a statistic to show you that too. I mean, this guy is just all over the place. He doesn't even tell you what the hell he's talking about.
United States over the last 20 years, total suicide rate has gone up by about 30%.
Okay, so
But if you look at a different...
okay, so at least he gave us something. The total United States suicide rate has gone up about 30%.
So you kind
Doesn't say how, when,
will to fight.
or how recent,
I think it's
or
fair to say
anything.
that
which does not have anything to do with autistic people or people on the spectrum.
drip feed of Western support.
A
That's
statistic
people
called
in the United
deaths
States.
of despair. It has doubled in 20 years. Deaths of despair includes not only suicides, but also deaths from alcohol use, drug overdoses, and others. Those are mental health problems. Those are addictions. They are mental health disorders. They are in DSM. Rates have doubled in 20 years. People weren't dying 30 years ago and we just didn't recognize it. And now we're recognizing death. Now we're recognizing suicide. We didn't really recognize it 30 years ago, but now we recognize. No. We know what death is. Morticians know how to
things are being reported very differently, smart guy.
recognize it and diagnose
And
it.
a lot of that stuff wasn't even reported. Or they didn't want to put a suicide, so they didn't. They put natural causes because it looked bad. It was bad. And so a lot of people would lie about the cause of death, saying it was a heart attack, rather than having to tell everybody that Uncle Joe blew his brains out.
And the rates are skyrocketing, a doubling in 20 years. That is nothing to ignore.
This guy does not have any facts on his side whatsoever.
What do you believe is causing it? Because clearly, when I've heard people, when I say people, I mean just the things you see in culture and media and maybe on Instagram that say, there's a chemical imbalance in people's brains. I've always struggled with that. I understand there might be sometimes, but I've struggled with that as a broad answer to a very complicated, nuanced set of issues, because I just have a bias to believing that humans aren't born broken. I believe that, my ancestors go back I've got a lot of ancestors that I understand how natural selection and evolution works. I don't think that I was born broken. So I think maybe there's an environmental factor, maybe something I'm doing or something we're doing as a society is increasing these rates of suicidality that you talk about. What do you believe is the answer that we're missing or not talking about enough?
The root causes which we can get to, and I have lots of ideas and thoughts on it. If you want to get into the weeds of what are the exact causes, we can talk about that. But the thing that people have not opened their eyes to is the science of what we call metabolism or metabolic health. And
Dude, if you can't show it, you don't know it. And you ain't gonna show it.
Ultimately, I'm arguing, the easiest way for me to put it is that what I'm arguing is
What he's arguing is there's no peer-reviewed paper on this, no science behind it. That's why he's arguing, because he has no science. He has zero science, zero proof. So that's why he's just arguing. Otherwise, he'd say, "Here's the proof."
On my gravestone, this is what it said.
mental health conditions, the chronic, serious ones in which the brain isn't functioning properly. Brain disorders that are causing...
Properly according to who? According to what? My brain is working properly according to an autistic brain.
And welcome to a bit of a waffle inspired by several videos
It's working exactly like it's supposed to as an autistic brain, actually.
ADHD and addiction,
The mental health symptoms. Those are the things I'm talking about now.
That we're all susceptible to, you believe?
I think we're all susceptible to it. Those, in fact, are metabolic disorders affecting the brain. And so the easiest way to understand why do we see skyrocketing rates of mental illness, it's not a coincidence that we're seeing those skyrocketing rates at the same time that we see skyrocketing rates of obesity, overweight, diabetes, and prediabetes, which are also metabolic conditions. That all of those things are rising simultaneously, and that the brain is an organ. And so some people can have metabolic problems, and some people can be thin.
Okay, look. We know, I say the brain bone is connected to the stomach bone. Okay, so we do know that there are metabolic processes, blah, 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 that affect the brain. Okay, there is no one that has unlocked any keys to anything, period, in the story. If we did, we would all know about it. So all these different diets or whatever are supposed to help your brain or whatever, it's all BS. All BS until we get the peer-reviewed papers that prove that. And nobody can produce that. This guy can't produce this, so he said, as he said, he is arguing. He is not proving, he is arguing.
And you still have a metabolic problem. So I'm not at all saying that obesity is the only driver.
That's a
Because a
great
lot of times
autistic
people think about it in that way. So are you saying obesity comes first and then everybody gets a mental illness? No, I'm not saying it that way. Sometimes the mental illness starts first because it's a manifestation of metabolic
And
dysfunction.
here he starts trying to fat shame, and he does start shaming obesity, basically saying it's fat mom's fault and fat dad's fault you're autistic.
In the brain. And it basically means the brain is...
In one study, they showed a little bit higher propensity, but that's one study, and it's not the overall big picture. And you know damn good and well that being fat, being a big guy, being a big lady, does not mean that you gave your kid autism. It doesn't cause autism. There's already other factors that were already there, period. Okay?
Well, I do think
Not your fault.
there was
isn't
skepticism
working
as what
right.
was
And so
coming out
somebody
of
might
that.
have
It was really just leaders getting
unrelenting
together, having a chance to
depression
discuss issues. They
or
would issue
unexplainable
statements, these
anxiety
communiques. They'd
or
have
psychotic
sort of fluff
symptoms or
announcements, but there wasn't a lot of
bipolar
reaction that they could
symptoms or
point to.
eating disorder
But
symptoms
after
or
COVID,
substance
with the
use
hot
disorder
war in
symptoms
Ukraine, Russia's invasion,
that they
with the
may
conflict in the
have
Middle East, with challenges around
symptoms, but
China,
all of those...
actually
You know,
turned out to be one of the few
Kim's...
forums where Western leaders can
I
get
don't-
together and make
I don't know a lot about
these
Kim's.
issues.
I think
the social
Kim's
tactics
research
that we're seeing
should
come
be
out of the United
looked
States
at
and the European
for
Union
sure.
and Russia, the coordinated
Absolutely,
approach to a lot of
1000% by
China,
people
and now this
more
announcement
qualified
from
than
Ukraine
myself
do
to
actually show you that
look at
there
that
are
and
some
have
real concrete
opinions
deliverables
on
that the
that,
G7
because
is finally producing.
I don't really understand all that stuff.
What NATO has done when it comes to supporting you.
Everything that I can see is it seems like she's on to something, and I think it definitely should be
Russia's
explored.
potential reaction, having delayed
That's where I believe, and I like him, but I
what
am
they can do with
100%.
including striking across
It's,
the board in Russia.
wherever
Well,
it goes.
these forums, the
Let's say that she was completely wrong.
has a very different purpose than the type of support
Then
that NATO is providing.
we would have to come up with the
So
science
the
of
money,
whether
the
to
$50
prove her
billion
wrong.
is aimed at reconstruction, it's aimed at
Kind
development,
of
it's
the way
aimed at
she's-
economic support for Ukraine.
You're
Whereas
taking
if you're
peer-reviewed
NATO
papers
members,
and
that's
just
where
kind of
you're dealing with
putting
some of the
pieces
military
together.
support
It's
issues.
kind of hard
And I
to
do
do
think a
wrong.
number of countries are
Unless it's just that they're
in
saying
terms
that
of
the
how to
conclusions
handle
that
this
she's coming
situation.
to
In the United States, President Biden is trying to be as forward-leaning, I think it's possible, without sort of getting the United States into an
I don't
war
know,
that
I
is
just
actually taking
don't
quite a
know.
bit of flack politically among some
Although I will
circles
say this, it could
for
help
the
with a
level of
lot of
support that
things
the
if
U.S.
she's
has
correct.
provided, but I do
Or
think there's a
even
strong
nearly
case for
correct.
engagement from all NATO
That's
allies in
exciting
terms
in
of
itself.
showing support.
But how
Those
quickly do you think
things
this
are
is
a
really, which is
manifestation
low,
of metabolic dysfunction in the brain.
Can you explain metabolic dysfunction to me like I'm a
Well,
10-year-old?
as I understand, and the
The
details have
easiest
not
way
been
to
released
explain it
yet,
is
I
that
understand they're
our
going to be worked out in the
bodies
next
and our
couple of weeks
brains are
and
made
then
up of
eventually made public,
cells.
but they are
And
front-loading,
all of
I
our
believe, 7
cells
years' worth of
need
interest
two
on that
essential
$300 billion
things
of
to
seized
function
Russian
properly.
assets.
Yeah, it's
So
really
the
sad
idea is to get the
that
money
yeah,
to
she's
create
been
an
on
offer
there
to set in place a
begging for
schedule
reviews
so that
for
no matter what
different
happens
people and
next year,
so
no matter
forth.
which year
But
goes
then
in,
again, I
that
have
people
heard
are
that
sitting
there
in
have been a
chairs at
couple of
next
reviews or
G7
something
summit, that
that
there will
weren't
still
good, but
be
then
money coming
I
in from
haven't seen
Ukraine.
those.
One of the
So
reasons why
that could
it's,
just all be hearsay. So I really don't know on that thing.
is that the
But
clock is ticking, isn't it?
from everything that I've seen from her, I don't see people going through really
2.0, the return of Donald Trump,
tearing her up.
who takes a dim view of
I don't know.
multilateralism and what the likes
They
of
need
NATO and
food,
the G7
oxygen,
How
Those are the big ones that most people know. It gets much more complicated fast because food contains all sorts of nutrients, so we need certain vitamins and nutrients, and hormones are playing a role. All sorts of things are playing a role. But at the end of the day, that's what metabolism is. Metabolism is taking food and oxygen and keeping us alive. They are fundamental to our health, but also the function of our cells. And when something goes wrong in that process, and there are lots of things that can go wrong, when something goes wrong with taking food and oxygen and turning it into energy, the cell can malfunction. And when it happens in your brain, it means...
there's a lot of status quo being questioned. A lot of status quo being questioned. And I'm sorry, she is right. You don't have to have a degree. There's a lot of things that people don't have to have an actual degree in to be experts at. And she isn't claiming to really be an expert at any particular thing, except for just pattern seeking and pattern recognition and seeing how different parts of what appears to be a puzzle, so to speak, come together.
Thank you very much indeed, Kelly.
She's kind of seeing patterns, how the different things come together is what it appears to be. And it appears that a lot of these different people from these different disciplines aren't used to seeing or collaborating with other people from other disciplines, or even considering that the 2 or 5 or whatever 7 disciplines might actually be directly correlated to one another. So there was a whole hell of a lot going on here, and the biggest thing is the medical. Okay, if you were to have a autism doctor, I think you should start with a neurologist. Flat out. Bottom line, better be a neurologist. To hell with the psychiatrist. Now, if you want to throw in psychology and so forth afterwards as a minor or whatever, fine, sounds good. But I would also recommend that they have a lot of GI background too, because the brain bone is connected to the stomach bone. So we're talking a neurologist that understands the gastro GI specialist that maybe understands a little bit about psychology. I put psychology very, very low on the list there because what psychology is used today is for neurotypical people, and I think that needs to be split into 2 completely, into a neurotypical and neurodivergent psychiatry, and they need to be looked at and treated completely differently.
And recognize that our security
actually, you know what? I had a bunch of the MTFR, the thing. Actually, I saw a bunch of that. I don't know why my doctor was looking at that. I was like, what's going on with that? And because of that, actually, and studying a little bit about Ken's work, I did not understand how like my flight response to EPA and so forth, and how beta blockers would help that, and also because I'm narcoleptic, can help with sleep patterns and so forth. And so
to the front.
Also can help with ADHD, so I'm now taking beta blockers
whatever they could
that I wasn't taking before, and that's partially because to chemically. Whether she was right or wrong about anything, I think she's on something personally, but I have zero qualifications and things.
And so far, it seems that gamble has not paid off the Russians.
And that's not very scientific.
Today, Civil Times Radio's deputy head of news. Today, on Frontline, we're talking to George Barros, the head of the
Russian that your brain can malfunction. And the way that we know the brain is malfunctioning are all of the symptoms of mental illness. When somebody
George Barros, thank you so much for
has
joining us on Frontline.
depression for no good reason.
Good to see you again.
When somebody has
Before we start the
anxiety
latest
for
on
no
the
good
ground in
reason.
Ukraine, we know
When
Russia has been
somebody
keen to make
just
advances
has experiences
since
like hallucinations.
Okay, for reasons that we don't know. It's not that there's no good reason for that. There's just no good reason for that there, buddy. You know? No, there's no reason that we can explain.
Or delusions for no good reason.
For reasons
That
we
all
can't
of those things
explain,
represent
dude.
the brain.
Come on. You're like putting it on them like it's their fault. Well, like they're, the way he's putting it is horrible.
If you could take me one step deeper into this idea of, food and oxygen being converted into energy in the cell, something goes wrong there. What goes wrong? Why does it go wrong?
So the real answer is it's extraordinarily complicated. There are many pathways in metabolism. There are many things that play a role. But the easiest way to understand it and the way to unify it, the helpful insight, the immensely helpful insight, and this is new cutting-edge information. Most people don't know this.
I appreciate it.
But there are these tiny things in our cells called mitochondria, and they are actually the primary sites in our cells that food and oxygen are getting converted into energy or building blocks for our cells. When you do a deep dive into the science of mitochondria, you can actually begin
autism. No matter how deep you go into mitochondria, you still don't know diddly squat about autism. Which is unfortunate, because it's a great deep dive to go into, but it's still not, you still don't know anything about it.
To understand what's happening in the brains and bodies of people with mental illness. And you can begin to understand all of these very complicated things, like why would neurotransmitters become imbalanced? Like what's causing a neurotransmitter imbalance, if there even is one? What's causing a hormone imbalance? What's causing higher levels of inflammation in the brains and bodies of people with metabolic and mental disorders? What about the gut microbiome? How does that play a role? But what about stress and trauma?
The gut microbiome, that's what it's called.
Psychological stress, trauma. How do those things fit in? Mitochondria are actually the scientific way to begin to connect all of these dots and help us understand why the brains of some people, quote unquote, malfunction, or why they are dysregulated, might be a better way to put it, or why some people can't seem to, quote unquote, get over it, get over a trauma, or get over a breakup with someone.
I can't get over it, whatever it is. It doesn't matter what it is. I can't get over it. It still sucks.
What's going on? Why aren't they more resilient? Why can't they pull it together?
Fred, thank you very much.
Mitochondrial dysfunction, as nerdy and sciencey as that is, can help us connect the dots.
What do I need to know about the mitochondria? What it is? I know it's in every cell of my body. Is there anything else I need to know about it before we explore these through lines and how all of these other things come back and connect to the mitochondria?
So mitochondria are present in most cells in the body. Not every single human. The glaring example are red blood cells, which actually lose their mitochondria. They have them when they are first forming, but then they lose their mitochondria. So red blood cells, interestingly, don't live all that long. We're constantly creating new ones and turning them over. So most people know mitochondria as the powerhouse of the cell, which means they take food and oxygen and turn it into ATP. And that's what most people learn in school. They're the powerhouse of the cell. But I'm here to tell you they are so much more than that. There are hundreds or thousands of them in most cells. They are highly dynamic. At one point, the theory of multicellular life on planet Earth is that mitochondria were once independent living.
I swear he's just like spouting off BS to try to sound intelligent. Because he's really not going anywhere. Well, mitochondria.
Bacteria. And that another single-cell organism engulfed that very first bacterium. And the two of those organisms lived. They stayed alive. Usually when you get engulfed by another organism, that means getting eaten and you die. For whatever reason, these two stayed alive and they became symbiotic with each other.
Sorry, I'm getting bored.
Actually, that event is thought to maybe have only happened once on Earth. And that single organism evolved into all multicellular life that we know today. So all living organisms that we can see with our eyes, plants, all animals, are evolved from that same organism. So mitochondria divide and replicate. They actually move around cells. They fuse with each other. They bud off from each other. They form patterns around the cell nucleus, which plays a role in which genes get expressed or don't get expressed. They do all sorts of things.
When people say that we have a predisposition, a genetic predisposition to mental health disorders, and that, you know, you'll have depression if depression runs in your family, etc., is there merit in that in your view? Is there evidence to support that?
Absolutely. So we know that mental illness runs in families. Genes explain some of that, but not all of that. The environment actually can influence things called epigenetic factors.
Yeah.
Which are...
Which is, we have no idea. When they say environmental factors, that's like saying, okay, we know genetics have a major part, and then there's something else. Something must be in the environment somewhere. Yeah, that's the ticket right there. Right there, that's the ticket right there. Because that's all it is. It's not necessarily like chemicals, like or anything like that. They just have no freaking clue. That's what it means.
Factors that control the expression of genes. They turn genes on or off. And those epigenetic factors are actually inheritable. You can inherit them from your parents. And so it's not all strictly genetics. Some of it is epigenetic. So first and foremost, there are no genes that are specific to specific disorders. Most people think, well, you know, if bipolar disorder runs in my family, there must be a bipolar disorder gene. And in fact, there isn't a bipolar disorder gene. There are genes that increase risk for bipolar disorder, but at the same time, they also increase risk for schizophrenia and epilepsy and autism and depression and other types of mental and neurological disorders. And if you look at the unifying theme, like, is there a theme for these genes? Is there a common pathway that can help us better understand mental illness? The common pathway is that most of the genes are affecting metabolism and mitochondria. One research study that came out a couple years ago, researchers have been looking for years at a high-risk gene for schizophrenia. And we know that people who have this very, very rare gene, so almost nobody has it, but if you do have it, you're at high risk for developing schizophrenia, along with lots of other mental illnesses, but schizophrenia is the big one. And the researchers did this deep dive into trying to understand what exactly is this gene doing. And at the end of the day, they said, it's affecting mitochondria. And that is probably how it is causing schizophrenia.
Wow.
Metabolism, that happens as a result of the work of the mitochondria. Is that accurate? So I make sure I'm clear on them before we proceed.
90% of metabolism, at least, is occurring in mitochondria. So it's that definition, as a scientist, I have to say, isn't 100% accurate, because there is a thing called glycolysis that can happen in cells where you can actually produce ATP without using mitochondria.
What's that?
So ATP is usually known as the energy currency of living organisms, of cells. And so, and that ATP ends up making cells work. It is the energy that's flowing around cells, or the molecule that's flowing around cells, to make receptors work, to make all of the machinery of cells work. And that becomes relevant. Maybe some of your listeners will know this. If you exercise really hard, like you're running a marathon, or you're running as far as you can get with a marathon before you absolutely are exhausted and you just have to stop, your mitochondria will actually become maxed out. That is what's preventing you from running, is your mitochondria max out. And it's like you don't have enough of them, or they're not healthy enough, and so they can't keep you going. They can't keep your muscles going, and so you peter out. And when you peter out, you turn to this process called glycolysis, which actually ends up producing lactic acid, or lactate. And so runners will get higher levels of lactate, and that can create soreness and all sorts of things. So metabolism is really the process of taking food and oxygen, and turning it into energy or building blocks. And that can occur on a small scale outside of mitochondria. But as soon as the mitochondria in most of your cells are dysfunctional or dead, you die.
Dude.
There's no way around it.
Come on.
So let's use some of those examples that you gave earlier. You talked about stress and trauma and these kinds of things. I'm really keen to know how a traumatic event can have an impact on your metabolism, your mitochondria, which then manifests as a mental illness. So if we take trauma, for example, people go through early trauma in their life. I don't know, you had a very traumatic upbringing. How do you think that, maybe even in your case, if you were able to see inside of your body and what was happening, that external traumatic event came into your body in some way, caused a physiological reaction, had an impact on your metabolism, which results in a mental health disorder of sorts?
It gets a little complicated because it goes through a couple of stages. So I'll try to walk you through it in the simplest way I can. When somebody is first traumatized, everybody, if they are normal, will have symptoms. If you get traumatized, you will experience fear, you will experience hypervigilance, you will want to fight or flee, or you might freeze, or you might surrender, you might beg for forgiveness or mercy or whatever. Everybody is going to have those reactions. In my mind, those reactions are not disorders. They are not malfunctioning brains or malfunctioning anything. So everybody will have that. However, when that happens, it immediately changes your metabolism. Your metabolism, the easiest way to understand it is the sympathetic nervous system gets turned on fiercely if the trauma is really bad.
Because you definitely with autistic people or neurodivergent people, we get cranky fetus. That's all there is to it. It is like definitely feed the ADHD.
I was wondering if I learned at that very young age that cycle somewhere in my neurons in my brain. So that's why I said, do we then learn the response to that trauma at that point as well?
We learn the response. We remember the response that we did.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as we've survived, that is the ingrained memory. The ingrained memory is when this happens, do this, because this is what I did, and I survived it. Mm-hmm. And so that becomes the default. And then that becomes a default pattern for many people. Mm-hmm. At some point in life, it can be actually be quite useful to look at that response. Okay, so when I was 5 years old or 20 years old or whatever, and that thing happened, I responded this way, and I survived it. Great. But how's this working out for me now? Is that the optimal response It's not about beating yourself up for I should have done something different back then. It's simply about recognizing and honoring I did what I thought I was the right thing to do. I did my best back then. But I'm smarter now. I'm older now. I'm wiser now.
Oh my word. Dude, come on.
If I could do it in karate and you disarm your assailant very quickly and rapidly, you may not think twice about the trauma. You may actually be emboldened after that traumatic event and think, I'm quite effective and skilled. Wow, those karate classes really came in handy.
How did it change in a mental health disorder or a metabolism causing mental health disorder?
And, I'm quite powerful and maybe even feel a little more confident than you normally would.
And that's the interpretation element, right, of the situation. So two people could be in the same situation, but have...
So that person still had the same physiological reactions, a gun in your face or wherever. That person's glucose was going up, their heart rate was going up, all of those metabolic changes were occurring. But so that's a success story, and that's probably a resilient person who moves on and never thinks twice about that trauma, or rarely thinks about it and thinks about it with pride if they do think about it. In the case where it doesn't go well at all, let's leave the extreme out where the person is murdered. Let's leave something less severe than that. But the person is beaten. They are injured severely. That can turn into what we call a mental illness. And that means that maybe they can't remember like they used to. It means that maybe, and now they can't pay attention like they used to. Now somebody might say, hey, maybe you've got some ADHD going on. Or their anxiety pathways become what's called hyper-excitable. And now their anxiety pathways are being triggered even when they shouldn't be triggered. And out of the blue, they're having panic attacks or anxiety symptoms. They can be sitting in the comfort of their own home, not thinking any scary thoughts, not watching anything on television or anything that's really disturbing. And out of the blue, they can just be overwhelmed with a panic attack. And that person, I would say, if they have a panic attack for no reason, that person's brain is now malfunctioning. It is dysregulated. And I would say that that person has now crossed over into what I would call a mental disorder, where their brain is, in fact, malfunctioning now. The great news, the hope, and we can get to more of it, is that those cells can be repaired. We can fix that.
Oh, boy.
We can do something about that.
That's a cure. That's a cure right there.
The person does not need to be like that forever. This notion that they now have a chemical imbalance that they were probably genetically predisposed to, and now we've got to just medicate them for the rest of their life. I don't agree with that. I'm not at all opposed to medication. If medications can be helpful to that person, 100%, let's use them. Let's help that person heal and recover. But I want to go deeper. I want to understand what is happening in that person's brain and body using this kind of
Focus.
information about metabolism and mitochondria, and how can we effectively help them heal and repair and recover.
You know, we talk a lot about diet and food on this show. As it relates to metabolism and mental health, diet.
So diet is huge. And most people have no clue that diet plays any role in mental illness or mental health. 95% of mental health clinicians think it's laughable that anybody would suggest that diet can play a role in mental illness. I think it's laughable.
What do you think?
I think if you do a deep dive into the science, all of the science that we have accumulated over the last 100 years and longer sometimes. But if you do a deep dive into all of those neuroimaging studies that we've been doing, all of the genetic studies.
We do know that diet has something to do with it. Now, what kind of diet or anything else, who knows? Nobody's gotten that part down, but having seen and proven that different diets do have an effect on mental health, yes.
We've been doing all of the neurotransmitter and hormone studies and trauma studies and adverse childhood experiences studies. If you do a deep dive into the science and you understand what is happening in the brains and bodies of people as a consequence of those things, or what could be causing those things, if you put it all together, you come to this soundbite that mental disorders are metabolic in nature. And there is no questioning whatsoever. It is incontrovertible that diet plays a massive, huge role in metabolism. And therefore,
diet is metabolism in mass.
I believe very strongly that diet might be playing a role in the mental health epidemic that we are seeing, and it also might provide an avenue of hope and healing and recovery. And I use the word might as the scientist in me.
That because you changed your diet to more sort of natural, healthier foods, at the level of the mitochondria were able to function more.
What about people like your mother?
I'm just skipping over whatever stuff he's saying to eat because, let's see, he's talking about keto diet here.
Fasting, on that $300 billion of seized Russian assets. So the idea is to give the money to Ukraine, but also to set in place a schedule so that no matter what happens,
caffeine stimulates
about autism and ADHD. So many. You know, I've had so many concerned parents message me specifically on Instagram saying, please, Steve, I've had a child diagnosed with autism. They're trying to understand it. They're trying to get good information on it. You've used the word autism and ADHD as we've been speaking about metabolism. What is the link in your view?
Everything. The link is everything. So the mitochondrial theory of autism actually was first proposed in 1985. And since then, we have had an explosion of research linking mitochondria and mitochondrial dysfunction to autism specifically. As I've mentioned to you, the rates of autism have gone through the roof. In the United States, have quadrupled in the last 20 years.
And he's lying. He is flatly lying. We do not know that it has the rate of autism. All we do know is for sure that people are getting diagnosed a lot because doctors are becoming more aware. That does not mean that because more people are getting diagnosed because doctors are better educated, that we have an epidemic going on.
They'd have this announcements, but there wasn't a concrete action that they could point to. But after COVID,
people think, well, what does that have to do with diet? Those kids haven't eaten a diet yet. Well, their parents have. And let me share a couple of statistics so people are scratching their heads. Where's all this autism coming from? I thought autism was genetic. And if autism is genetic, it shouldn't quadruple in 20 years. Quadrupling in 20 years means something in the environment is causing it.
No, it does not. And I just said that. And we do not know. They do not know. And when they say environment, this guy is using the colloquial term. He's using it in the colloquial sense. When they say environment, it means we have no idea. It does not mean anything that has to do with anything that is within the colloquial sense of environment or the situation you live in.
Yeah, well, these forums and
It means we don't know.
announced today,
So therefore,
very
it must
different
be
than
in
the
the
support
environment.
that NATO is providing.
To provide just
the money,
one
$50 billion, is
piece of
aimed at
evidence
reconstruction, it's aimed at
to support what I'm
development, it's aimed
saying.
at economic support
If a
for
woman
Ukraine, whereas in the NATO
has
context, that's where you're
obesity,
dealing with some of the military support issues.
she
And I
has
do think a
double
number of
the
countries
risk
are
of having
walking
an
a fine
autistic
line in terms
child.
of how to handle this situation.
If a woman has
In the United States,
diabetes,
President Biden is trying
she
to
has
be
double
forward-leading,
the
and I think
risk
it's
of
possible
having.
that's
Okay,
getting the United
these
States into an arc
my
because actually
came
taking
from
quite a bit of flack politically
one
among
study,
some circles
very small study.
for the
We
level
don't
of
know
support that the
all
U.S.
this
has
is
provided, but
absolutely
I do
true.
think there's a
Just
strong
because you have one
engagement
study
from all
doesn't
NATO allies in
necessarily
terms of
mean
strong
you
showing
have all
support.
kinds of
But how quickly do you think this 50
Having
million,
an
which is a
autistic
low
child.
to say,
If a woman has both obesity and diabetes,
Well, as I understand,
she
the
has
details have not been released
quadruple
yet.
the
I
risk
understand they're going to be worked out over the next couple
of
of weeks
having
and
an
eventually
autistic
made public.
child.
But they are front-loading,
If
I
a
believe, 7
man
years worth of
is
interest on that
obese,
$300 billion
he
of
has
seized
double
Russian
the
assets.
risk of
So the
having an
idea is to
autistic
get the money
child.
to Ukraine, but also to set
So
in
people
place
are
a
scratching
schedule
their heads
so
trying
that
to figure out
no
where
matter
is
what
all
happens
this
next year, no
autism
matter which
coming from?
European and
Well,
United States
look
leaders are
around
sitting,
in the
there's chairs at the
population.
next G7 summit.
Are the rates of
There will
obesity
still
going
be
up?
money coming
Are the rates of
into Ukraine.
diabetes going up? The answer is unequivocally yes.
urgency at this G7 is that the
And
parties
that
represented, Kellyanne,
is a reflection. It's not about.
And I know very few people that
who takes a different view of
autistic and diabetic.
multiculturalism and what the likes of
I'm
NATO
the only one that I know of.
how complicated
To tell you the truth.
return of Donald Trump.
I think I have one other friend
things
that
be
might be diabetic. But
Well, as his lead
it's just
negotiator
where
for the G7, I'm not sure I
any
totally
other
character or agree with that
Fat
characterization
shaming.
of the view that
I
the
don't want
G7
anybody to hear that and wag their finger at fat people and say, oh, you're causing autism because you're overeating.
oh my God, you just
What I
said
would say
that.
is I do think for a long time the G7
You
didn't
just
necessarily
said
have a
that
defined
fat
role of what it was trying to accomplish.
Wow.
But it's not just the United States who may have a different leader come January sitting in the
It's
chair
not
for
that
the
simple.
G7.
That's
There
not the
are
way
a
it
number of other
goes.
countries sitting around the table who
People
may
with
also have
obesity
different
have a
leaders.
metabolic
And I think
or
the G7 is
mitochondrial
in part
problem.
driven by
That is why they have
personality. I do think that
obesity.
makes some difference, the
Now, that might
specific
be
individuals
caused
who
by
are
the
there,
foods they're
but
eating,
I also think the biggest
but
driving
they don't know
factor is
any
what
better
is its
usually.
purpose. And right now,
They
there
think
are
it's just
a number
about
of
calories, and what I'm here to say is no, there's more to food than just calories. It might be those chemicals in the food that you're eating, or something else, or it might be chemicals in our environment. It might be pesticides or
So
microplastics.
he's sitting here saying, oh, just throwing random crap out there. He's just
The
throwing
forever
random
chemicals
crap
that are
out
becoming
there.
more and more
Like I
ubiquitous.
said, he's using the colloquial term of environment, not the scientific term, not what they're saying.
Ubiquitous. All of these things disrupt metabolism and mitochondrial function. And so when I talk about obesity and diabetes increasing risk for autism, it's not about fat shaming, it's about understanding. It's about understanding that the parents have a metabolic problem already. That means that they have a problem in their cells with their mitochondria, and they then pass those on to their children. And in some cases, it may not show itself immediately as obesity or diabetes. It might show itself as a brain condition because lots of other things can play a role. And if an obese woman, for instance, also has an infection during pregnancy, that's going to increase her risk for having an autistic child even more. So she couldn't help whether she got an infection or not. Tragically, we just had an epidemic called COVID. And the early signs are telling us
Now he's going to blame it on COVID.
that, in fact, neurodevelopmental disorders are going to increase as a result of that. We already had a quadrupling of the rates of autism. We are likely to see even worse statistics going
He
forward.
is literally blaming autism on COVID.
The hope is that if we understand that science
No, dude, it's not
We can do
hard.
something
We have to suppress the immune system.
about it now, today. If you understand, if you see signs of autism in your child, if you see signs of metabolic or mental health conditions in your children, if we intervene early enough, we can probably do something about it.
This is all I can stand to this.
Number one, by recognizing the problem, and then two, for some people it could be as simple as dietary interventions, or just hyper focusing on good, clean living. So that means prioritizing sleep, little less screen time, little more human contact, purpose in life, family
offensive despite not yet being fully prepared to their desired
connection.
strength.